The Rick and Morty video is coming. I just picked the worst time to start working on a longer video. Turns out planning a video with more intense editing and a second person during the same week as GDC was not a good idea. On top of that, we both got sick afterwards, but now we're all healed up and back in action, so we're ready to record. Hopefully, you'll see it soon. I want to talk about one of the worst games of 2024, a game based on a licensed property. One that fails to understand why people even liked that property to begin with. Cookie-cutter game mechanics, a slapdash story tied together a game that, by all means, should have been great. It followed up a beloved saga of games, but instead of bringing anything interesting to the table, it tries to coast off the good graces of its namesake. No, I'm not talking about the new Suicide Squad game. I mean, don't get me wrong, that game is bad, but today we have a different subject. If you're above the age of 12 and you lived in America for any amount of time, there's no doubt you've heard of South Park. For almost 30 years, South Park has used its colorful cast of characters and crude humor to provide biting satire and commentary about the world around us. If there was a major event that happened in the last 30 years, odds are South Park had an episode about it. From geopolitical conflict, to celebrity scandals, to even the console wars. South Park always had something to say in a way that left us thinking by the end of it. It's a good show that manages to still be biting even today. It's so ingrained in our culture that I really don't feel like I need to explain it all that much. You're more than likely already familiar with these characters and what they do, so let's just get into it. Here's why their recent game is bad. South Park Snow Day is a sequel, by name only, to the 2017 game South Park The Fractured But Whole, officially making the Stick of Truth saga a trilogy of games. Unfortunately, while those games were creative and unique, this game just comes up short. Just by looking at it, you start to notice a huge issue. For one, this game, which is a sequel to two RPGs, is a multiplayer hack-and-slash card battle game. If you look at the art style of the last two games, you'll notice that they are almost one-to-one with the show. Matt Stone and Trey Parker went on record saying that they wanted anyone who walked in and saw you playing this game to get the impression that you were watching the show. This is something that the games have been commended for. This was the best these games could ever look. Stick of Truth and Fractured But Whole were 5 years and an entire console generation apart from each other, yet Fractured and Stick look identical. So it baffles me as to why this game decided to go back to the 3D art style of older South Park games. More problems arise when you actually boot up the game. Right away, the first thing that I ran into was the realization that the audio for the first cutscene was actually desynced. I thought maybe the game booted up wrong, so I booted up my console again, and sure enough, the cutscene is just out of sync. Audio issues continue well past this. This game's general audio balancing is horrible. I had to turn the volume up several times just to hear what a character was saying. The problem with that is that the audio isn't balanced at all, so there are several times where it's just inconsistent. Characters will be really loud, but the people they're talking to will be very quiet. The premise is simple. As the title suggests, there is a snow day in South Park, which of course means, what else? No school. So you as the new kid join up with Cartman for another round of Game of Thrones, fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons. What are we calling this game? In one of the few jokes that I actually find funny, it's explained that you keep getting overpowered and undefeatable, so to try to limit you from being super OP, they implement a card upgrade system. A great idea in concept, but it ends up falling very short. You don't get to keep these upgrades, and there are very few of them for each weapon. It's supposed to give an element of randomness to the whole thing, but there isn't enough, so most of the time you just end up reshuffling until you get the stuff that you like. On top of that, your weapon variety is very limited. You don't have the usual class system that the last two games had. Instead, you just have a selection of ranged and melee weapons that you choose from for your guy. How many exactly? 3 apiece. 2 out of the 3 melee weapons are sword-based, by the way. Oh, and 2 of the ranged options are fire-based magic attacks. So when customizing your character, you really aren't going to be standing out. There really isn't much to this game other than slashing down waves of goons, so the fact that your weapon choice is limited is just salt in the wound. Let's talk about that next. The entire game, you're going to be in a snowy area, mashing the attack button until everything on screen is dead. That's all you do. It's just that for 5 tedious levels. Sometimes they'll throw obnoxious tanky enemies at you that soak up your attacks and can't be stunned. Sometimes they'll throw adults at you that grapple you into oblivion. Sometimes sections will go on for too long, but that's all it is. You're probably saying, oh, it's a multiplayer game. It must be better with friends, right? And to that I say, probably. But every time I try to play this game with friends or people online, we'd lose connection halfway through a level. I have literally never beaten a level of this game with another person. Not for the lack of trying. So it's just me. on my own in a game designed with waves of enemies. It got so monotonous that I had to turn the game's difficulty down to easy, just so I wouldn't be completely bored halfway through a level. Okay, so the game sucks, but the old South Park humor has to be there, right? Well, no. I don't know how to explain this, but the jokes feel very half-baked and non-committal. Like someone put something down on paper that could be funny if it were told better. Best way to put it is that it felt like the first draft of a script. There are a few jokes in this game that I find funny. Cartman talking about how there are other new kids, but you are the only one that matters got a chuckle out of me. The aforementioned joke about you becoming OP was also very funny. That's really about it, which is really bad for a South Park game. There isn't one joke in this game that comes close to the first boss, or the microaggression scene from the fractured butthole. The story itself doesn't fare much better. So the town of South Park is being engulfed by a blizzard, which is unnaturally strong. Halfway through the game, you find out that this is none other than the work of Mr. Hanky. He's angry because several years ago he got cancelled and kicked out of town. So he takes over the town using dark matter, turning people into zombies, and then you defeat a giant poo worm, and that's the game. This game could have said something very interesting about the idea of cancel culture. It would have been a great time for it too. 2023 saw a lot of famous figures finding themselves embroiled in drama and controversy, and that's even bled into 2024. We have a lot of stories about people leaving the public eye due to scandal surrounding their name, but we don't have a lot of stories about people coming back. How does one come back from a controversy? Should we even let them? How far is too far, and where do we draw the line? All of these are interesting ideas, worthy of discussion, but the game never gets that far. The story ends with Jesus coming out of nowhere and telling the kids that they have to forgive Mr. Hanky because they were his friends. He didn't do anything to better himself or to try not to say horrific things, but they should forgive him anyway. Oh, and he literally tried to destroy the city of South Park. That's the plot of this game.
Ambien messes with my head. You ever take that crap?
Well, I can't argue with that. Also, this entire time, I thought the game that the kids were playing was all in their heads. And then suddenly out of nowhere, you use the rules and mechanics of that game to defeat an actual threat to South Park, with no explanation as to how that works. Anyway, if you want a good licensed game with effort and love for the franchise it's representing, play SpongeBob the Cosmic Shake. Like I said, it cares about its source material and wants you to have a good time, and oh yeah, it actually takes advantage of its premise and uses it to tell an interesting story with varied set pieces. Better yet, why not do another run of The Stick of Truth and The Fractured But Whole? It's been 5 years since Fractured dropped and a decade since Stick of Truth. I think it might just be time to give those games another go. See you on the Rick and Morty video, whenever that may be.